The first time I saw him eating an onion like an apple, I knew the next few months would be unforgettable. Have you ever had a neighbor who changed your understanding of normality? One who made you reconsider the boundaries of weirdness? I had one, and I'm still not sure if he was a genius or insane. Maybe both. His name was Jason. He was 30, and he appeared in the neighboring apartment that rainy Friday when I was planning a quiet evening with a TV show. Instead, I got a balalaika concert at 3 in the morning. Not guitar, not violin, balalaika. Jason was short, about 5'3", with curly brown hair that always looked like he'd just woken up, even at 8 in the evening. His face constantly beamed with a smile. Not that strained, polite smile, but a genuine, sincere one, the way children smile when they see puppies. He radiated some strange energy of kindness that was both calming and unsettling. Because people who are constantly happy either know something we don't, or they're hiding something terrible. I never figured out which category Jason belonged to. The first 2 weeks I tried to keep my distance from him, just nodded in the hallway and quickly moved on. But Jason was one of those people who's impossible to ignore. He always wanted to talk, always had some story, was always overly friendly for a big city where people usually pretend not to notice each other. Jason decided that his 5th-floor apartment balcony was the perfect place for a garden. Not a few pots of parsley or basil, no. He dragged in bags of soil. I saw him carrying them up the stairs, refusing the elevator, because elevators kill the connection with the physical world. He set up some homemade irrigation system made of plastic bottles, hoses, and what looked like parts from an old bicycle. Within 2 weeks, his balcony transformed into a real jungle of tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and something that looked like marijuana but turned out to be dill of enormous proportions. One morning, I stepped out onto my balcony with coffee, hoping for a few minutes of peace before work, and he was already standing on his, holding the biggest tomato I'd ever seen in my life. It was the size of a small melon, a rich red color that practically glowed in the sun. Jason extended this tomato to me across the dividing wall between balconies. I thanked him but said I didn't need it. He insisted, said this wasn't just a tomato, this was the embodiment of effort, patience, and love for the earth. When I eat it, I'd eat a piece of his heart. I'd become part of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. I'd connect with the cosmos through this tomato. I took the tomato. What could I do? Refuse a piece of my neighbor's heart and a connection with the cosmos? That seemed like rudeness of cosmic proportions. For the next 2 months, he constantly brought me vegetables. I couldn't even keep up eating them. My refrigerator turned into a produce stand. Colleagues at work started asking if I'd started a farming business on the side. My mom, who came to visit for the weekend, asked if I'd joined some vegan cult. And Jason accompanied each vegetable with a philosophical sentiment about life, death, and the cycle of nutrients in nature. One evening, he handed me a perfectly straight green cucumber. Told me that the cucumber grows from a seed. The seed consumed nutrients from the soil. The soil received these nutrients from decomposed plants from previous years. Those plants absorbed sunlight that traveled to us through cosmic emptiness for millions of kilometers. When I eat this cucumber, I'd eat a dead star. I'm stardust eating stardust. We're all stars who forgot about it. I stood on the balcony, holding a cucumber and feeling extremely uncomfortable about holding a dead star. But the cucumber was really delicious. Jason didn't just grow vegetables, he talked to them. I heard it through the wall. He'd go out on the balcony at 6 in the morning and start telling his tomatoes about his dreams, plans for the day, about what he'd read the day before. Once I heard him reading Nietzsche to them out loud. I'm not kidding. Thus spoke Zarathustra for tomatoes. When I asked him about this, he answered completely seriously that plants react to vibrations. Words are vibrations. Philosophy is high-frequency vibrations. He gives them the best he has, his thoughts, his voice, his understanding of the world. In return, they give him fruits. It's an honest exchange of energy. It was hard to argue with a person whose tomatoes were truly the most delicious I'd ever tasted. Sometimes he brought me tomatoes just like that, without warning, knocked on the door, handed me a plate of vegetables, and left. Sometimes he left them by the door if I didn't answer. Once I came back from work and found a basket under my door with cucumbers, peppers, herbs, and a note. Energy must circulate. Today is your turn to receive. I started feeling like part of some ritual I didn't fully understand, but somehow accepted. Maybe because the vegetables were incredible. Maybe because Jason was so sincere in his weirdness that refusing him seemed cruel. Jason had a peculiar hobby that I discovered by accident. He collected recordings of silence. Not music, not nature sounds, not white noise for sleep. Silence. Pure, unfilled silence. I learned about this when one evening I heard absolute silence from his place through the wall. It was so unusual after weeks of balalaika, singing, and some audiobooks about quantum physics at full volume that I got worried. Maybe something happened to him. Maybe he fell and can't get up. I knocked on the door, ready to call an ambulance. He opened the door a minute later, holding a professional microphone with a huge windscreen that looked like a dead gray cat. Asked me to speak quietly because he was recording. I asked what exactly he was recording. He answered that he was recording silence at 9:34 in the evening in an apartment with an open window, western wind, 3 degrees Celsius, humidity 62%, barometric pressure 1,015 hectopascals. He asked if I could hear it, said it was special today. It had a melancholic note. I heard nothing, but he clearly did. He invited me inside and showed me his collection. His laptop was packed with folders of files, hundreds, maybe thousands of files, each labeled with amazing pedantic precision. Silence in the bathroom after rain at 4:23 with humidity 87%. Silence in the kitchen with the smell of coffee, Saturday morning, October. Silence on the balcony during a full moon, no wind, temperature -2 degrees. Jason told me this was his collection, 5 years of work. 843 recordings of unique silence. I carefully noted that silence is the absence of sound, so how can it be different? He looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student who said the earth is flat. Explained that silence is never the same. It has texture, depth, color. Silence after rain is different from silence before a storm. Morning silence isn't like midnight silence. Silence in a cold room sounds different than silence in a warm one. Air has different density. It absorbs even the absence of sound differently. I started arguing that he's recording absence. He interrupted me and said he's recording the presence of absence. It's a philosophical difference, but it's important. He played one of the files. We sat in his apartment, which was strangely minimalist. No unnecessary things, just bare walls, a yoga mat on the floor, and what looked like a nest of blankets in the corner. I later learned that was his bed. For 5 minutes, we listened to silence. At first, I felt nothing except the awkwardness of the situation. 2 grown men sitting in a dimly lit room listening to silence. It was absurd. But then, maybe after 3 minutes, I started noticing something strange. The silence really did have a quality. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something undefined, almost tangible. Like the air in the room became thicker, gained weight. Jason whispered for me to listen. This was the silence of a March evening, when snow melts but the ground is still frozen. The air has special humidity. Silence becomes viscous, almost velvety. I wasn't sure I heard velvetiness, but I definitely felt something. Maybe it was self-hypnosis, maybe placebo effect. Maybe I just wanted to feel something so I wouldn't seem like an insensitive idiot. But the feeling was there. When I went home, late in the evening, Jason said something I'll never forget, that people don't know how to appreciate silence. They're afraid of it. They fill every second with music, podcasts, TV, conversations. They run from silence like from something dangerous. But they shouldn't, because it's in silence where the answers to all the questions we're afraid to ask live. Silence isn't emptiness. Silence is the space where you can hear yourself. And most people don't want to hear themselves because it hurts, because it's hard, because then you have to admit things you hide under the noise. I went home and turned on the TV, just so it wouldn't be quiet. Jason was right. I didn't want to hear myself that night. Too many thoughts, too many uncomfortable questions waiting their turn in the silence. The next few days, I caught myself listening to silence. In the morning before turning on the coffee maker, in the evening before turning on the TV, in the elevator when I rode alone. And you know what? Jason was right. Silence really is different. It has shades. Morning silence is invigorating, almost ringing. Evening silence is tired, thick. Silence in an elevator is anxious, tense. I'd never noticed this before. A friend came to stay with Jason in June for 2 weeks, a Korean named Min June. Turns out they met online in some forum about alternative lifestyles and minimalism. Min June was similar to Jason in spirit, but his weirdness manifested differently. Min June played StarCraft. He didn't just play, he lived in it. I heard Korean language through the wall, incredibly fast clicking of mouse and keyboard. I didn't even know a person could click that fast. Periodic exclamations of triumph or despair needed no translation. Emotions are universal. The game lasted all night, every night. I'd wake up at 7 to go to work, and he'd just be finishing another match. The first 2 nights I was irritated. The sounds were disturbing. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to endless clicking and Korean I didn't understand, and got angry. But somewhere around the 3rd night, something changed. Strangely, it helped me. I'd suffered from insomnia for years. Since my teenage years, I could lie in bed for 3 to 4 hours, staring at the ceiling, turning over in my head all my mistakes, failures, embarrassing moments that happened 5 years ago but somehow seemed important at 2 in the morning. I tried everything, from valerian to meditation, from milk with honey to antihistamines that supposedly cause drowsiness. Nothing worked for more than a few days. But the monotonous sounds of the game from Jason's wall, Korean language I didn't understand a word of, fast clicking that created some kind of rhythm, all of it created a hypnotic effect. It was like white noise, but alive, with human presence but without the need to interact. My brain stopped trying to understand the sounds, stopped analyzing, just accepted them as background. And in that background, I started falling asleep within 30 seconds of laying my head down. For the first time in years, I slept 8 hours without interruption, woke up rested. Colleagues at work noticed I looked better. I felt better. All thanks to the Korean behind the wall who played StarCraft until dawn. When Min June left, I actually missed him. The first night after his departure was terrible. The silence behind the wall seemed too loud. My brain waited for the sounds of the keyboard, for Korean, for the players' exclamations. They weren't there. I lay awake until 4 in the morning. Jason noticed my returned dark circles after just 3 days. Offered to play his silence collection at night through the thin wall. Said silence can be just as calming as sound. You just have to learn to listen to it. I refused. That would be too weird even for our building. Though sometimes, when insomnia became especially brutal, I caught myself thinking about those Korean StarCraft night marathons and regretting I hadn't recorded them. Eventually, I found a YouTube channel where someone streamed recordings of Korean StarCraft gaming sessions. It helped. Not as well as live Min June behind the wall, but still. I downloaded several hours of recordings to my phone and played them before bed. The neighbors, if they found out, would think I was crazy, but it worked. Jason, learning about this, laughed hard. Said I'd found my personal version of silence. That everyone needs their own sound or their own absence of sound. The main thing is to find what resonates with your soul. I wasn't sure Korean StarCraft resonated with my soul, but I started sleeping better, and that was the main thing. Sometimes the strangest solutions turn out to be the most effective. Jason never wore shoes. Never. Even in winter, even when going out to the hallway to take out trash, even when going to the store. His feet were tough as leather, with thick calluses that looked like natural soles. He walked barefoot on asphalt, on snow, on gravel, and it seemed not to bother him at all. The first weeks I thought this was temporary madness that would pass, but no. This was his life philosophy. He explained to everyone who asked that the earth needs to speak to your feet. Shoes are a barrier between a person and reality. It's like wearing gloves 24 hours a day. Your hands would forget how to feel textures, temperature, life. Same with feet.
We cut ourselves off from the earth and then wonder why we feel disconnected from the world. Once I ran into him at the supermarket. Saturday, lunchtime, lots of people. He was standing in the checkout line, barefoot, with a basket full of samosas, some exotic spices, bags of flour, and vegetables I didn't recognize. I walked up to him and whispered that they wouldn't let him in here without shoes. He smiled with that unchanging childlike smile of his and answered that they already did. When you're confident, when you don't doubt your right to be who you are, people don't ask unnecessary questions. They sense your confidence and accept it. Most rules exist not through laws, but through our agreement to follow them. If you don't agree, the rule disappears. I wasn't sure about this philosophy, and I suspect lawyers wouldn't be either. But the fact remained, he stood barefoot in the supermarket and nobody made any comments. Even the security guard by the entrance, who was usually picky about everything, just nodded to him. Jason bought everything he needed. Turns out he made samosas himself at home, learned from YouTube videos from some grandmother in Delhi. He returned home, and half an hour later, I heard a knock on my door. He stood with a plate of still hot samosas, steaming with incredible spice aroma. Handed me half. Said food must be shared. It's the law of the universe. Energy must circulate, not accumulate in one place. When you share food, you share life. I didn't know this law of the universe, but the samosas were so incredible I was ready to believe in any laws he proposed. Crispy dough, juicy filling of potatoes, peas, and spices I couldn't identify, but which created the perfect balance of spiciness and aroma. Between bites, I asked if he cooks barefoot. He answered, of course. The kitchen is a sacred ritual. He needs to feel the floor under his feet, the temperature of the tiles, the vibrations created by boiling water. Cooking isn't just a process of preparing food. It's meditation, it's connection with elements, it's transformation of raw to cooked, cold to hot, separate ingredients into something whole. How can he feel this whole process in shoes? It was hard not to acknowledge his logic, especially when the samosas were so delicious. Jason told me he hadn't worn shoes for 2 years at all. His feet adapted. At first it hurt, but then the skin hardened, the muscles of his feet became stronger, and now he could walk anywhere. In winter, he smeared his feet with a special balm of his own making, from beeswax and some herbs. He told me one more strange thing. Since he stopped wearing shoes, his back problems disappeared. Doctors say there's no connection, but he knows there is. When you walk barefoot, you hold balance differently, distribute weight differently. The body returns to its natural state. We're not created for shoes, we're created for walking on earth. I looked at my $200 sneakers and suddenly felt like a fool. I'd paid $200 to cut myself off from the earth, for a barrier between myself and reality. Jason walked barefoot and was happier than me. That evening, returning home, I took off my shoes and walked around the apartment barefoot. The floor was cold, a bit uncomfortable. The muscles in my feet tensed unusually. But there was something in this, something primal, natural. Like a part of me that had been asleep for years suddenly woke up. I didn't start walking barefoot constantly. I wasn't ready for such a radical step. But at home, I started going without shoes more often. And you know what? My back really started hurting less. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe placebo effect, but maybe Jason knew something orthopedists with their expensive insoles didn't.
One day, Jason invited me over for tea. He brewed some rare green tea he ordered from Japan that, according to him, opened the third eye if you drank it correctly. I didn't know exactly how to drink tea correctly to open the third eye, and I wasn't sure I wanted to open it, but the tea was delicious, so I agreed. That's when I saw his bedroom, more precisely, the absence of a bedroom. In the corner of the living room, the only large room in his apartment, lay what could only be described as a nest. Blankets, pillows, soft throws, all gathered into a round structure on the floor that resembled a giant bird's nest. No bed, no frame, not even a mattress. I asked if he slept there. He answered yes, absolutely, without a shadow of shame or awareness of the strangeness of the situation. Beds are a social construct. We're not born with a need to sleep on an elevated platform.
This was invented for cold medieval castles where you had to sleep higher off the floor so you wouldn't freeze. But now we have heating. Why would he need to sleep on a bed? I said, well, because it's comfortable. He disagreed. The nest is more comfortable. It hugs you from all sides. You feel protected, safe. It returns you to the state of a child in the mother's womb, the safest place you ever knew. Sleep in a nest is deeper, better quality. He sleeps 6 hours and feels like he slept 10. He offered to let me try lying in the nest. I refused. There were limits to my readiness to immerse myself in Jason's world, and lying in his nest was beyond that limit. But the idea intrigued me. The next week, when I couldn't fall asleep again, I took the mattress off the bed, put it on the floor, surrounded it with pillows. It wasn't a nest, but it was something different. And you know what? I slept amazingly well. Maybe because of novelty, maybe placebo effect, or maybe Jason was right, and the body really does remember the safety of the womb. I didn't tell him about my experiment. Some things are better kept to yourself. Jason told me more about his philosophy of sleep. That modern people have forgotten how to sleep properly. We sleep in uncomfortable positions on springs and foam that don't conform to our bodies. We sleep in boxes called bedrooms that separate us from the rest of our living space. We sleep according to schedules that contradict our natural rhythms. He slept when he was tired. Sometimes it was midnight, sometimes 4 in the morning. Sometimes he took 3 naps during the day instead of 1 long sleep at night. His body told him when it needed rest, and he listened. I envied him. I had to wake up at 7 every morning for work, regardless of how I felt. I had to function according to society's schedule, not my body's needs. Jason lived by his own rules, and he seemed happier for it. Around July, something new started. Every morning at exactly 5 a.m., I heard singing through the wall. Not the balalaika, not audiobooks, singing. Female voice, melodic but strange, in a language I didn't recognize. This went on for 2 weeks before I finally asked Jason about it. Turns out a woman had moved in with him. Her name was Emma. She was his wife. I didn't know Jason had a wife. In all the months he'd lived next door, he'd never mentioned her once. Turns out she worked freelance as a graphics designer and traveled a lot, so she was rarely home. But now she decided to stay for a while and work remotely. Emma was small, maybe 5'1", with long dark hair usually tied in a ponytail. She had the same perpetually cheerful demeanor as Jason, the same kind of earnest weirdness. They were perfectly matched. The singing, she explained when I finally met her, was part of her morning yoga practice. She practiced on the balcony at 5 a.m. singing mantras. She believed that morning energy was the purest, and greeting the sun with song aligned her chakras for the day. I didn't know what chakras were or how they got aligned, but the singing was actually beautiful once I got used to waking up to it. It had a quality that made you feel calm, even if you had no idea what the words meant. Emma was a vegan, not the preachy kind, but the quietly committed kind. She brought me food sometimes, just like Jason did with his vegetables. Homemade energy balls made from dates and nuts. Smoothies that looked like swamp water but tasted surprisingly good. Cashew cheese that actually tasted like cheese, which blew my mind. She and Jason together were like a force of nature. They'd have philosophical discussions at 2 in the morning that I could hear through the wall. About consciousness, about the nature of reality, about whether plants had feelings, about parallel universes. Sometimes their friends would come over, and they'd all sit in that minimalist living room on the floor, drinking Jason's Japanese tea, eating Emma's vegan food, talking about things I didn't understand but found myself curious about. I started feeling like I was living next to some kind of peaceful cult, but a cult that made really good food and seemed genuinely happy, which was more than I could say for most people I knew. The real madness started in March. I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of a drill. Thought it was neighbors upstairs or downstairs doing renovation. It was early, but in our building, renovations were frequent. Old building, always something needing to be fixed. I tried to fall back asleep, but the sound didn't stop. Then I realized it was coming from Jason's apartment. I ignored it. He'd already managed to surprise me so much that a drill at 6 in the morning seemed trivial compared to his other antics. But then something else started. The sound of an angle grinder cutting metal, then rhythmic hammer pounding, then the smell of fresh wood, then the smell of paint, then something chemical that made me open all my windows. This went on for a week, every day, from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Other neighbors started complaining. One grandmother from the first floor even called the police, but it turned out Jason had all the necessary permits for interior renovation. On the evening of the 7th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The pounding and humming was so strong it seemed like he was tearing down a wall. I knocked on the door, ready to finally express everything that had built up over a week of sleeplessness. Emma opened the door. Small, smiling, in work overalls, covered in sawdust. Her hair was tied in a ponytail, protective goggles pushed up on her forehead. She asked if I was looking for Jason, said he was on the roof. They were building a house, asked if I wanted to see. I was confused. On the roof?
She said yes, there's more space there. Here, they were just making details. She offered to show me. We went up to the roof. And there, among the antennas, satellite dishes, and old ventilation systems, stood the frame of a small house on a platform with wheels. Not a toy house, a real house, with windows, a door, even a small terrace. Jason was screwing in something that looked like a window frame. He saw me and broke into that huge smile. He explained this was their dream, a tiny house on a truck. They'd saved money, bought an old truck, and now they were building a home. In a month, they'd leave. They'd live autonomously, grow vegetables, record silence across the country, travel wherever they wanted. The next month was insane. Every day, pounding, drilling, paint smells. Neighbors complained, but Jason was unwavering. He had all his permits in order. Emma worked alongside him, measuring, cutting, painting. Sometimes I'd see them on the roof at midnight, working by flashlight, both covered in dust and paint, both smiling like children building a treehouse. I started going up to the roof sometimes to watch. I couldn't help it. There was something captivating about watching them build this crazy dream. The house was taking shape. It was tiny, maybe 100 square feet of living space, but it was beautiful. They designed it themselves, every detail thought through. A fold-down bed, a tiny kitchen with a 2-burner stove, a composting toilet, solar panels on the roof, water tanks, everything needed for off-grid living. Other neighbors started coming up too, at first to complain, but then just to watch. Even the grandmother who'd called the police came up one day and ended up staying for an hour, asking questions, nodding approvingly. There was something about Jason and Emma's enthusiasm that was infectious. But the biggest madness happened on departure day. Jason decided that before leaving, he had to organize a farewell ritual. He invited all the neighbors to the roof. Few came. Most still considered him crazy. But I came, and 3 more elderly neighbors who were curious. And surprisingly, a young couple from the 3rd floor who I'd never really talked to before. Jason brought his balalaika. Emma brought a tambourine. They played and sang some folk songs. Then Jason gave a speech about freedom, about following your dreams even when everyone thinks you're weird, about living authentically instead of living according to other people's expectations. He said we all wear shoes on our soles. We're afraid to walk barefoot through life. But true freedom is when you allow yourself to be strange, to be yourself, without apologizing. Then they gave us tomatoes from their balcony garden. They'd harvested everything before leaving. Emma gave out packets of seeds. Jason played a recording of silence, for contrast, he said, and we all stood on the roof listening to silence and holding tomatoes. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. Here we were, a random group of neighbors who barely knew each other, standing on a roof at sunset, listening to a recording of nothing, holding vegetables, while 2 people prepared to drive away in a house on a truck to live off the grid.
Someone started clapping. Then we all clapped. Jason and Emma bowed like they just finished a performance. Maybe they had. Jason and Emma left that spring. The last thing I saw was their truck with the small house on top, painted in all the colors of the rainbow, driving out of the courtyard. Jason honked, Emma waved. The house swayed slightly, but looked stable. They tested it, driven it around the block multiple times. It worked. 3 months later, I got a postcard from the Carpathian Mountains. Life is beautiful. Silence here is different. Tomatoes grow slower, but taste better. Don't forget to walk barefoot sometimes. 6 months ago, I saw them on Instagram. Someone at work followed Emma's blog and showed me. They're still living in that house on the truck, traveling the country. Emma runs a blog about autonomous living with thousands of followers. Jason sells his silence recordings as meditative audio tracks online. They have a small following of people who actually buy recordings of silence. Who would have thought? They grow vegetables in containers attached to the truck. They park in beautiful places and wake up to different views every week. They look happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way most people never achieve. Jason's apartment was rented to a quiet family, a couple with a young daughter. They're nice, normal. The wife bakes cookies and brings them over sometimes. The husband works in IT. The daughter practices piano at reasonable hours. It's all very normal and pleasant. Now it's silent behind the wall. Too silent. Sometimes I miss the balalaika at 3 in the morning. The philosophical lectures about tomatoes. That crazy feeling of living next to someone who truly, genuinely decided to live how they wanted, not how they were supposed to. Last week, I took off my shoes and walked barefoot on the grass in the park. The feeling was strange, even unpleasant at first. My feet aren't as tough as Jason's. But I kept walking. And after a while, something shifted. I started feeling the texture of the grass, the coolness of the earth, the small variations in the ground beneath me. It was like a sense I'd forgotten I had was slowly waking up. Somewhere out there, in the mountains in a truck house, Jason probably smiled. Because the earth was speaking to my feet. And maybe, in that conversation, if I'd listened more carefully, I would have heard the silence. That same special silence Jason recorded for months. The silence where answers hide. The silence that reminds us living strange is normal, if you're truly living. I still can't sleep without Korean StarCraft in the background. I tried explaining this to a date once. She looked at me like I was insane. I didn't see her again. Maybe I am a little insane. Or maybe Jason's weirdness was contagious. Maybe living next to someone that authentically strange rubbed off on me. My apartment is more minimalistic now. I got rid of half my stuff. I don't sleep on the floor in a nest. I'm not that far gone. But I did get a much simpler bed frame. I grow herbs on my balcony. They're not as magnificent as Jason's jungle, but they're something. I talk to them sometimes, quietly, when no one can hear. I feel stupid doing it, but the basil is thriving. So maybe there's something to it. I listen to silence sometimes. Real silence, not recorded. I turn off all the devices and just sit. It's uncomfortable at first. My brain screams at me to turn something on, to fill the space. But if I push through that discomfort, there is something there. Some quality to the emptiness. Jason was right about that. I'm not living in a truck. I'm not walking barefoot everywhere. I still go to my normal job and live my normal life. But something shifted. Some small part of me that was asleep wake up. Some permission I didn't know I needed. Permission to be a little weird, a little different, a little more myself was granted. Jason gave me that. By being unapologetically strange. By living exactly how he wanted without asking anyone's permission. By showing me that you can eat onions like apples, sleep in nests on the floor, record silence, grow a jungle on a balcony, walk barefoot through supermarkets, and build a house on a truck. and be happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy. Most people never figure that out. They spend their whole lives wearing shoes on their soles, as Jason would say. They fill the silence with noise because they're afraid of what they might hear. They eat tomatoes from the supermarket that taste like water because they've forgotten what a real tomato tastes like. They sleep on expensive mattresses in separate rooms and wonder why they feel disconnected. Jason remembered. Or maybe he never forgot. He lived like a human animal, connected to earth and seasons and silence and himself. And he was the happiest person I ever met. I don't know if I'll ever be that brave, that authentically myself. But at least now I know it's possible. I saw it. I lived next to it for a year. I ate his cosmic tomatoes and heard his recorded silence and watched him build his dream on a roof and drive away in it. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just knowing it's possible is enough to change everything. The quiet family next door is nice, but sometimes, late at night, I wish I could hear that balalaika again. Just once. Just to remember what it felt like to live next to someone who was truly, completely, unapologetically alive.